so it being a minute or two after 12 o'clock, I'm gonna suggest we start the call to our March 24th, 2025, and Patrick just walked in, meeting of the Concord Advisory Board, MCI Concord Advisory Board. Why don't we take a roll call, starting with you, Patrick? You just say you're here, that's all. Peter?
Here.
Linda?
Here.
Dan? Here. Emily?
Here.
And Mark?
Here.
Awesome, thank you, everybody. And then we need a clerk for the meeting. I don't normally remember. Great, thank you, Patrick offered. We have minutes that John was clerk for of February 25th to approve.
I'm motion that we approve the minutes of February 25th, 2025 for the MCI Concord Advisory Board.
Okay,
Second.
thank you. All those in favor, Patrick?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Dan? Aye. Emily?
Aye.
And Mark?
Aye.
Thank you all. Okay, next order of business is a debriefing from the most recent DCAM coordination meeting, and honestly, usually I feel like it's been a couple of weeks, but there was a meeting in between. Paul, I see, is on the line, so if I miss something.
Also, note for the record that Elizabeth is going this as well.
Thank you. And so did John.
Hello,
All right.
sorry to wait.
Welcome. No, it's great. We appreciate you.
See you.
I like the color of your jacket, John.
Thank you.
That looks like you would be very well received when you're traveling.
Especially in the
Oh.
Netherlands, yeah. I was there 3 weeks ago wearing this jacket. They all love it.
Okay, so I'm looking for my notes from them. Sorry. Right. So this was the last meeting we had was the 21st of, is that right? That doesn't seem right. The 21st of
That
February.
would have been Friday.
You didn't mean
Dan,
to
I
write
think
it.
I've got the 28th.
Okay. All right. Well, Paul, I'm not to put you on the spot, but I am going to. That's okay. Can you highlight the issues, because I'm having trouble finding
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I think that the core things that I had on that February 28th meeting were things that we've since worked down together on a couple of different work streams. There was the response that we had recently received from the town regarding the wastewater treatment plant. And we have subsequently had a follow-up conversation between the assigned towns assigned team as well as DCAM on that front. We continue to go back and forth there. I think there's takeaways that sit with both teams' councils for documents. We've shared a license agreement with the town for getting a consultant on site. And I think the town's council is taking a first pass at some additional terms on that front. We had the meeting between town and DCAM and Mass DOT last week, starting a what we hope is all going to be a quarterly coordinating call about the parallel or adjacent projects at MCI Concord and the Mass DOT's effort to take a look at Route 2 and the Rotary, which they are, as I understand, this is a new phase. Suddenly there's not going to be a prison on the southeast corner of the Rotary. So what that means for future alignments is something that they're starting to take a look at. And then we also had a brief call a couple of weeks ago. Our DCAM commissioner, Adam Bakey, expressed his regrets at being unable to join for the consulting team kickoff a few weeks ago, but had a chance to meet with folks from the town and the consulting team just to, further reiterate DCAM's, interest in being a great partner with you on this. And, as we've said here many times, and also, reiterating our priorities around, the effective green redevelopment of the site, the creation of housing opportunities at a variety of price points, and the hope for a project that will meet both state and local needs and priorities for something that'll be feasible to do, so that we actually see a new future for this. So I think those were the things that we all talked about as a group a few weeks ago, and the things that we've all in various venues had continued conversations about since.
Thank you. I actually thought both of those meetings, and there were two separate meetings, were very productive. And I thought the agency, it was a great back and forth conversation, and so I'm optimistic that we're all on the same page and working towards the same direction and goals. So thank you. Anyone have any questions about that? Alan, is there any update from your end in terms of the
No, I think Paul captured it pretty well. So,
thanks. All right, so the next order of business is a town staff update from Megan.
Thank you. I have two things to talk about today. Can vote on what you want to talk about first. We have money and scheduling. Their preference, money. Thought that might be the case. So what I was hoping to do today is to give you a little bit of an update on where we are with funding for this project in FY25 and FY26. And then, kind of get your input on FY26. So for FY25, this won't be new to the members of the subcommittee on legal and government affairs, but we have encountered a little bit of a hiccup in the FY25 earmark spending. And so, I brought this up to Elizabeth Akers Moore, who put it on the agenda for the subcommittee to discuss either last week or the week before, which they did. And the recommendation out of that subcommittee was to have a discussion with Representative Cataldo, which has taken place. So it's a little bit of an update of where we are. But when we got the earmarks, which are, so generous, and we're able to do so much with it this year, there wasn't any language about kind of how they were to be spent other than through the end of June. And right now we have contracted on the larger earmark, the 475. And so we have, we have a contract agreement with the Executive Office of Economic Development for those funds. And we have tried to enter into an earmark agreement for the $250,000, but we are hearing from the Office of Economic Development, who's in contact with the Office of Administration and Finance, that they'd like us to spend the whole first earmark before we enter the agreement on the second earmark. So this was disappointing to hear, because there's so much work to do and we're trying to do it all right now. We have had to bring on consultants. We brought on Weston and Sampson, we brought on agency, and the way our agency contract is specifically, you can't pay for things that you don't have yet. So we're not gonna make that last payment until the end of June, right?
And the state is saying they don't wanna essentially give us access to that balance until we have fully spent the first portion.
That's what we're hearing, yes. And so, so we brought it up to Representative Cataldo, who is very supportive of understanding where we're coming from in this unique situation. And so he had already contacted the Office of Administration and Finance, you know, he understands where we're coming from and he's working on it. So I think that is, I hope that we can get that resolved. He's committed to assisting us.
Yep.
We also, I also met with Representative Gentile this morning and discussed this, you know, sequencing that has come to our attention, and he said, well, this is, you know, such a unique opportunity, and, you know, why that should be able to be resolved. So I just wanted to let you all know that this is something where, as we are looking for funding for FY 26, we're also working to make sure we have full access to the funds that have been committed in FY 25.
So I'm clear, the way I remember us structuring that was we had the primary contract with agency, and then we had these other contracts, whether it was Western Sampson or Stantec or wherever. And if those are burning along or chugging along and spending money, is it possible that we would spend the 475 from before that expires? And allow us to access the 250? So is the issue that not being able to make commitments to the consultants?
So I think you bring up a good point, and that's Elizabeth Akers-Moore made the same suggestion, and I think there is a possibility we could reorganize things. Where I'm coming from is that when we enter into these contract agreements with the state, we put forward a budget and said, this is what we're gonna spend it on. And so I put in, you know, 400,000 for agency, or 440 for, you know, that work, and a smaller amount for wastewater. I think it was 35,000 for wastewater out of that first chunk of the 475. And so some of the language in the correspondence that I've received with the Office of Economic Development is like, we'll only consider unlocking the second year mark after the first one is spent. And so I was alarmed by that, because what would happen if we did spend the first one, and then they considered not unlocking the second one, and then we have a contract with agency, and you know, so I'm reading this from a conservative lens, I would say, and that's why we're bringing it up to the legislators to discuss how to proceed. And I think that I think adjusting our budget that we put in for the first year mark to reflect some of the other spending that we plan to do is probably an option. And I think we don't know yet exactly how it's gonna get resolved, but I think that is a path that we could, you know, adjust.
Megan, would it be, you're already doing this, but I'm just thinking like communicating kind of the funds flow that we're anticipating.
Like
I
a
could
cash
imagine,
flow?
I could imagine it on a one-page schedule that just lays out, you know, this is the expected payments to our various consultants. You know, we could say, like, if it is true that there is, you know, the first funds come out of the 475, then we can show how that gets exhausted, and then, you know, simply the timing by which we would then be expecting to access the second tranche to pay for the remaining schedule, which should tie to the budget.
I think that's wise. I
So I
haven't
think
done it in that form, but I think that makes sense.
I could, and I'm happy to schedule it. I would just imagine one page that you could then bring to the legislators to show like.
Yeah,
Because otherwise, we're not gonna meet the commitments that we've signed.
I would say our legislators get it, so that, and they're, you know, advocates for this project and for Concord. And how if that's a tool that they could use to discuss it with the state offices, I think that I can see how that would be a benefit. I just don't want anyone to leave thinking that we have to convince, you know, Representative Cataldo and Gentile, that's not true. They understand, they're working on it. And the nuances of state government, it's just, you know, we're working with a few different groups here, and I'm trying to be sensitive and grateful for the funds that have been granted without stepping on toes or pointing fingers. And so if you're hearing kind of that from me, it's because we're just, you know, earnestly trying to understand how to proceed.
I personally hear it as you being proactive, recognizing that they might not be speaking exactly the same languages, and you're trying to make sure we don't get pinched. So I appreciate it.
What confuses me a little bit is that I think we've already contracted for most of the 725. So in a sense, if they're now saying you don't have a portion of what we thought we had, we could find ourselves in trouble with those vendors that we've already contracted. right? So that, the folks at OECD, or it's called, should be aware that based on the fund, the availability of funds that were, which very clearly communicated for us and set aside for these purposes, we followed appropriate protocols, contracted for $725,000 in services in FY 25. So if they leave us high and dry, that's the problem.
Yes,
Linda?
Thank you. Just a, quick question. Of the 725, was there any staff time that we anticipate so that?
we did not include staff time in the budgets for those two earmarks. Although we are spending some time.
No, well, it's clear, and I thought there was the.
We talked about it, yeah,
Talked about
but
it.
there's so, we did talk about it, and, but there's so much to do that, the thought was to, utilize our outside consultants to spend the money on that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I just, if we had that, we could work it in,
Mm-hmm,
possibly, but we don't, so.
Mhm.
and I don't wanna sit here and pretend that I understand how the government works and the different offices and stuff like that, but, I think I could imagine Patrick's suggestion being really, and John's comment, that being helpful, that just give them something so they understand. So,
Mhm.
so if someone who's just looking at things in buckets, is saying, hey, you haven't met that obligation, or somebody sees it over time, they might make it,
Yeah.
illustrate.
And two questions. The first one was, have we fully allocated the funds? Would be my,
The agency contract, was for 400,000, so that contract has been signed. And then Alan, I don't know if you wanna speak to kind of where we are with the Weston and Sampson, work that's ongoing.
Yeah, the real challenge, because we actually reduced it to allow for more planning, but we have, not sure what allowance, our real challenge is getting on campus right now, so we're working through some of the details on the license agreement to actually get in and do work, in and around campus. So as Paul mentioned, we had some discussion last week as far as the license agreement, we gotta nail that down, and then we have vendors that Weston Sampson is lined up to start doing some of that work, but I'll sort of, over the next few days, we'll try and get a better handle of what schedule we can meet.
Do we know the full amount, or is just
Yeah,
the residual?
Yeah, no, it's whatever the remainder was, I can't remember.
Yeah, the budget that I think that we put aside for wastewater was about 285, I think, over the two earmarks. So there's a component from the first earmark and then just about the entirety of the.
Yeah, we may have spent the first 35.
Right,
I'm not sure sort of the allocation, the earmarks, we're proceeding.
Yeah.
Regardless,
okay.
And I will say for the wastewater, we have a backdrop, if there was some crazy. Again, the state doesn't release the rest of the money, we still have a fund that we're drawing from. So that's for wastewater.
And then the second part of my question is really more procedural in detail, but, this work is going through the end of June, and I know in my own practice, we don't bill for work done in June until July or August. So is that been understood, and
Yeah.
we can still bill against the work?
yes, that's okay. And actually that brings me to the next piece of my update, if that's okay. Yes, we have talked to them about the final bills,
Okay.
cause we operate that like that too,
Yeah.
for fiscal years, and so now, actually, before I shift gears, Elizabeth, did you have anything to say on that one? I didn't make sure we're representing that, appropriately.
You're muted, Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry, say that again. I didn't hear.
Oh, I just summarized kind of our
Yep.
conversations with Representative Cataldo and talking about the FY 25, and I was gonna go into FY 26 discussion, but I didn't know if you had anything to add about talking with the representative last week.
The only thing is, I think Patrick. Ooh, that me? I don't know if that's me. Hold on. Ooh.
You're called it twice.
Yeah, one's on mute.
Can you mute me in that other one? Cause I can't even find it.
It is muted.
Weird.
Your second one is muted.
Okay. Oh, it didn't work. There we go. Okay, so the only thing I was gonna say is Patrick mentioned putting this out on a schedule. Megan, you had already written at Simon's request, kind of an outline of what was happening. I don't know if he's gotten, and he was gonna forward that or use that to talk to some people, so I don't know whether you need that second schedule or whether what Simon received was enough.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I did put it in written form, but I do like the idea of a chart too, so,
Yeah.
yes. Good point. Okay, so, oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, that's good.
I'm just gonna switch gears to FY 26, so, I think one thing I wanna lay out is kind of where we are with funding for FY 26. I know, Mark, you've talked about this a lot, and this is a project that's gonna, go on through multiple years. And so what we have to date is $100,000 from ARPA, which is from our federal source that needs to be spent by the end of calendar year 2026. And so we have those funds set aside. I think the thought process was that could fund the second phase of the work for zoning that we have quoted, but we're not in a contract to do. So that's one piece of funding. Federal funding, but like local control. Second piece is there's a warrant article for town meeting requesting funds for this project for FY 26. That amount hasn't been determined yet, and I don't know exactly, Mark, if that's gonna be discussed at a future select board meeting, or if you're looking to hear from the advisory board on that.
So yes, it is going to begin to be discussed. The finance committee is putting some pressure on the select board to put a number out there because they view this as part of their effort to set up some reserve accounts, and our expectation is that the funding for this would come from free cash. So it's a question of how much free cash would be committed in this direction versus how much free cash might be transferred to a reserve account. I have previously just said out loud for the sake of a number that I thought something on the order of $250,000 would be a good start, mainly because it felt like it would cover the work that we've committed. But I would be really open to any further thoughts about what our spending might look like in FY 26. And I think it's precisely because of some of the uncertainty that comes along with things like the state funding that we need to be able to pay bills that we incur, even if we might treat it almost more like a revolving account, where if we do get a grant from the state, then okay, we pay with that. But if we don't, or have another source of funds come in, then we've got a backdrop.
Okay, so with those in mind, those are the two items out there. The next piece is if there's going to be another earmark request. Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, do we owe that to the representatives of like?
Yeah, so there's been some discussions about it, and I think this is a good opportunity to, kind of share where we are so far and where we have to go. When we did speak with Representative Cataldo about the FY 25 earmark, he shared that, I think the earmarks that we got last year were really significant. And he already had his meeting with the leadership, and he is not expecting to lead the charge on an earmark for this project next year. But he would be supportive if another one came up, right? So he is still super supportive of the project, but I think what kind of basing on what he did last year and kind of where we are in the cycle right now, his meetings were earlier. This is where we are.
Hey, Megan, I think that's a little different from what I heard. What I heard is we basically missed asking for money for Simon, and whether or not he would have gotten it is one thing, but just to put on our future, I don't know, to-dos, we basically blew it with that deadline because he was already meeting and no one had reached out to him, or he had been told that we weren't asking for any money. That being said, I'm sorry, Megan, you probably were going to say this, that he had said to talk to Representative Gentile, which I don't know if I had spoken to his office, and I don't know if when you guys spoke to his office today, that had come up, asking Representative Gentile to do it.
Yep, so I spoke with Representative Gentile this morning, and he talked about a few things. One is the state of the state budget next year, and just some of the federal changes in funding and how that's going to impact the state for next year. He mentioned specifically the Department of Education, and just trying to understand expectations there. We talked to him about the FY25 earmarks, and I've been here before you all saying we have to spend it by the end of this year, we have to spend it, and that's the direction really I had gotten. But in speaking with Representative Gentile, he said that at this juncture here in March, he would be willing to put forward a PAC, which I forgot to look exactly what that stands for, but it means you could use the earmark in a future year. And so that had been discussed with Representative Cataldo and had been in earlier in the year, and I think it was probably premature. We didn't have everyone under contract yet. I think now that we do, it's on the table. So I think that might be an avenue that would be helpful, especially if we're having some issues, or not having issues, but we need to get on campus for some of the wastewater efforts. It might make sense to, if we don't have it all spent this year, to request to push forward some of those funds for the next fiscal year. So he said he would be open to that.
Megan, did he say absolutely? Because when I talked to his aide, they said the same thing. No one knows anything about, obviously the budget is very uncertain, but that wasn't a don't ask. It was that ask, you're probably not going to get it from us, but you should still ask.
Yeah, I was just gonna get to that. Yeah, I wanted to mention that his openness to support an extension of using the funds that have already been granted, and set the stage for expectations at the state level. And also, again, yeah, I said, what if we came forward with the number? And he said, yes, you can certainly ask. That's the same as what he shared with you, Elizabeth. So that is one thing I was hoping the group could talk about today. If there was a request that we could pass forward, I told Representative Gentile that we would follow up with him, but since you were all meeting, it made sense to touch base about it. So
I think Megan is super helpful. I think we should definitely explore that. Feels like we should bring back the schedule that we talked through with Alan, at this point, a month or two, probably closer to 2 months ago, where we looked at what I'll call the comprehensive budget, and discussed how we were going to allocate monies across both the needs of the planning and visioning, as well as the wastewater treatment assessment at a minimum. To now understand if we could be, if we have the option to push funds into the next fiscal year, how we might look at that draft with fresh eyes. Because that was a pretty important fixed variable that we were working with, and we did that.
Does it make, along those lines, does it make any sense to do that in concert with agency and some of the other consultants, since they have a better understanding, once we've seen their timeline? That we can have a sense of how much money will leak over into the next year. Or capacity.
I guess I would also, so, there's a certain amount of work to do in this remaining fiscal year that we know is a fixed amount. But then in terms of new funds, it would be good to understand the work. I think we've laid it out fairly well for the wastewater component, but is there beyond the zoning components that we got some pricing for in the RFP, are there additional elements that we would want to have done in the next fiscal year? And then on top of that, do we need to purchase the wastewater treatment plant in 26, and is there a cost to that?
So I think the short answer is no, we don't need to purchase the wastewater treatment facility in 26, and that would be a separate town meeting article anyway. But I think I take your point. I think there's a good question, and one that we could put to agency that says, you know, what studies or activities that cost money should we be doing beyond what based on what you've learned in your discovery phase now? You know, for example, if we have our eye on one or more of the structures, then what level of assessment should we be doing of those structures? Should we be, getting an engineering or some other kind of evaluation, and what order of magnitude would those things cost? And I can anticipate that we might be able to have a list of those sorts of things to back up a number that we were planning to move at town meeting. But obviously we don't have that quite yet. And, that sort of brings me to the question of sort of where are we in the discovery of phase, and how soon might we begin to understand what else is going to cost money that needs to be done?
I'm under the impression we're gonna get we're gonna get an update on that when we meet with them next week, okay?
I was gonna say, I would think that it might be a good time to start working with DCAM as well, to look out to the next fiscal year at what studies they would be funding and have underway, and how we could coordinate the needs as they see them as we go to the next phase of working with the developer as well, and what might be suitable to be funded by a potential developer that we could request in an RFP that they, and I guess we will be preparing next year.
And the flip side of that, what we don't want to go investigate further, as Paul has made clear in a couple of instances, there's certain things that we don't.
Could I just also, Megan, ask a clarifying question? So we might have the opportunity to extend funds via PAC into the next fiscal year. And it is also highly unlikely that through the same means that we got the 725 for this fiscal year, that there will be no money next year.
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I don't think I have the kind of full picture to say that it's very unlikely. I mean, I think that's not what I heard from Representative Gentile today. But I am trying to manage expectations, I think, regarding the request, based on what I heard, but we did get a lot this year. And so I think what he said today is that we could help you spend that next year too, right? And some of the same funds. But there, I mean, I think, as Elizabeth pointed out, asking for it, I think, he's definitely open to it, and, willing to entertain it, and maybe expecting that we would ask here.
Probably have to ask pretty soon though, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
That's what I was gonna ask. Did he, when is the deadline, just so we don't miss it for him? When's his deadline?
I thought he said he had a meeting, April 1st, but it's short. I mean, it's within the next week or so.
Right, so we don't have tons of time to go back to agency and ask everyone. I would also say that when I spoke with his office, they mentioned that we should reach out to Senator Barrett, that the Senate might be more likely to get us some money, and that budget process is a little bit later. So how we get to a number that we can present to Representative Gentile, I don't know exactly, but we need to do it quickly.
John has a question.
So I agree with what we're all, I think, we all have consensus on, which is we need to get a better picture of how much money we need next year to complete this project, right? And in the absence of having kind of a detailed request, it's hard to just throw out a number, right? We don't know if we're $100,000 short next year, or $500,000 short. And until we actually put together the actual scope of work for ourselves next year, it's gonna be hard to do that. Optimistically, I like to think that this year is gonna be more intense in terms of outside support than next year will be, based on the calendar we've laid out. We go from visioning to zoning to, potentially bidding and blah, 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 right? So that may not, it probably won't be as expensive, but I think we really do need to get some ideas what the spending is gonna be ASAP. Understanding how the state budget works, I'm concerned we're starting too late, right? If Cataldo's already saying to us, I can't support you in this, I mean, he'll support, but he's not gonna lead, that's a problem. So I'd suggest as a contingency, we work hard to make sure that we can push some of our 725 into next year. We have the opportunity to do that, right? So in other words, I don't want to lose that in me too, so. I think we have two different streams here. One is ensuring that the acronym was used. We can carry those unspent funds over, especially, by the way, if they don't give us access to.
Well, I can't use that unless I get contract with the
Okay,
first, so
but
that's the critical first, but yes,
But
then.
definitely, we gotta
then
put
we-
together a first draft scope of work next year and have a sense as to what kind of resource it's gonna take to make that happen.
Just to clarify, Megan, you mentioned that we had ARPA funds that had to be expended by the end of calendar year. No,
Yes.
12/31.
federal calendar year, which is. the
No,
end of
it's
September or
Yeah, it's December.
December,
yeah.
okay. Good.
I had a follow-up about the ARPA. I mean, clearly there are other things we could do with that money, so why wouldn't we use the 100,000, which is, Peter, the number that we have, that I think I got from you, right, for, that needs to be used for zoning work for next year? Why not at least ask for that 100,000, since that's a valid number?
Do we
That-
already have?
Yeah. I would agree with that.
So it feels like it'd be helpful to know from Congressman Cataldo and Gentile and then Senator Barrett, like some rough timing. If it's April 1st, that's I think next Tuesday. So that would be really fast. At the same time, if you go back to a consultancy like agency, I speak from my own lived experience, they will get you a price if you tell them that you need it by the end of the week, and even if it's rough. So, but we just need, before we throw them into extremis, I think we do need to know
Yeah, I mean,
if that's a real deadline or not.
I think at minimum, we could tell them the cost for the remaining zoning work that we have. And then the cost for the remaining wastewater work that we have, so.
Well, and theoretically, they have a better handle on discovery, right? Because we all know that's a balancing act.
I don't see any advantage to going in and saying, oh, we have 100,000 from ARPA, because why would we do that if we can try to get that money from the state?
The other question I have, which is a little bit tangential, is maybe for Paul at DCAM, like, are there other? This has come, I think, these funds have all kind of come through the town. Are there other potential buckets of money that could come through DCAM?
That's a good question. DCAM certainly, like, we are planning to put our staff time on the engagement pieces. We're waiting, we're looking to see what the exact engagement calendar looks like and where we can best plug in, and whether that is in tandem with one of agency's engagement events, or whether we better fit a right after the end of the fiscal year gap in the timing. And John, that's kind of a question over to you perhaps as much as anything. We want to plug in our staff time at the right time. As far as is there stuff that we could, Patrick, are you asking, is there funding that we could transfer to the town? I don't I'm not the right person to speak to that, but that's not how I understand that DCAM typically works, and I'm not sure we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I don't know.
If there are pieces of work that need to get picked up in some ways, it's going to be kind of on a case-by-case basis. I think we've said from the start, zoning in particular, is important that like it's clear, like we don't control the zoning, and zoning work is not something that I think ideally DCAM would have more ownership of. Likewise, we can't really do anything to support wastewater treatment plant work, as that's part of a legal perspective transfer negotiation between the town and us. If there are other things, if there is need to find a way to fill in engagement work or things like that, it's possible. I don't know, and I would have to know kind of what those pieces are that aren't able to be funded by a budget allocation or by other sources of funding that the town has. We're certainly very invested in this being successful, and we as there are things that we can take more of a lead on and plug in a way, we're certainly happy to talk that through and figure out how, if and how we can do that. Does that answer the question?
I think so, Paul. So what I'm hearing is that there are no funds available or like avenues to funding available. What you're offering is potentially staff time. If there is, like if we were to lose our outside consulting support.
I don't think there's routes to funding for like DCAM is not the agency that can transfer funds to the town to do work. If there, we had contemplated before you all were very successful in getting funding, we had contemplated that we might need to be the ones to say contract a consulting firm. And so it's not impossible that we could find a way to get back that. I mean, there's any number of capital priorities, and we have not allocated funding to this for that purpose, given that the town has been taking the lead on that front. But there are, we hire consultants, and that, there are ways that we could figure out how to do something like that. I don't know what the contracting or what the pace of doing that would look like. Nor can I guarantee that we'd be able to figure that out given the variety of competing priorities. But if it comes to a time where something needs to get done and the town doesn't have the funding to be able to do it, we will at least certainly talk about how we could, if it's again something that would be appropriate. Like, we don't ideally think that the state should be, like, the DCAM should be the one paying for zoning, and we certainly can't pay for stuff that's related to the wastewater treatment plant transfer, because that's that's not an appropriate stance on the two sides of the legal agreement there.
So Paul, just for clarity, if something like the historic assessment of the 3 properties, is that something, it seems like from an outsider's perspective, is that something that would be in DCAM's wheelhouse, or at least in conjunction with a consultant?
Probably in conjunction with a consultant, but that's something that could be possible. So, I mean, if there are more, we got a request from agency for information, and we've shared what we're able to share with them. So I think they're digesting, what we have. If there are recommendations, as I think you've mentioned, if there's recommendations from them for further investigation, we can certainly talk about where that sits with whom. As we've expressed elsewhere, and I think, you also got, like, there's a lot of this that can probably be done. A lot of further investigation that we would expect would be done by a developer during a due diligence period. The state wouldn't prefer to spend lots of money on invasive studies that a developer could, should, and probably would do on their own. They can't rely upon things that are provided to them by the other side of a agreement as well. So, like, a developer is going to need to do that. So we don't want to get out over our skis and spend, either state money or town money that doesn't need to be spent on investigations that really should sit with the developer. But if there's engagement work that needs to help, move this along, like, there's lots of stuff that, could make sense, then we'd be happy to figure out how to help support.
Yeah, I do think that, you know, the funding of all the diligence connected to the wastewater treatment plant is kind of outside the scope of this committee, we know that, right? And for various reasons, it made sense for us to kind of push some of those dollars from the earmark over to that side of the project. With the understanding that we might get some of those funds back essentially next year for this project. Just kind of throwing together some quick thoughts on like, what is our scope of work look like for next year? I think there'll be development of the zoning details, right? I think there'll be ongoing communication support from agency potentially, but there's not gonna be, there probably won't be a whole bunch of more visioning and all that stuff. There'll be a process of kind of putting out an RFP for developers, I think.
But that would come from
That's
DCAM.
decaf.
That's the game, and then,
But I think you're right. I think we'll have some oversight.
my point, and then the last thing is kind of whatever happens with regard to developers submitting permitting requests, but that's not really this committee's job, right, the town. So my initial sense is that we don't need $1 million next year, right? We may need closer to $100,000 to $200,000. Which
That's right.
is within the, if you look at what we're doing with the agency this year, plus the 275, it would essentially deferred spending. 225?
275.
275. If we can get permission to use those funds, our full 725 next year, we may be just fine.
I think we're already using the 725.
Yeah, we
No, but
are.
but some of that goes over to
Right, and
to
it comes
wastewater
back.
treatment, which we would get back from
Right.
towns.
Yeah, it's 475 and 250.
Yeah, and I think,
Clear, I wanna understand that statement.
Yeah.
So what, John, do you understand you're getting back from?
We're not getting anything back.
I thought that we were essentially
That's
helping address the cash flow
$230,000,
issues.
so I just wanna make sure.
Yeah,
That was wishful thinking.
no, I'm with John. So I could have misunderstood it, but
Yeah.
the impression was that we're basically shifting expenditures in time, and so that we could utilize the money before the fuse ran out. And so that, and then the opportunity would be to backfill that with either ARPA funds or other town meeting funds. And
You're shaking your head, I've never understood it that way.
yeah.
Dan and I see it, that's how I understood it.
I did it as well.
The project has multiple elements. Planning is a critical one, and that's this board has been advising how to proceed with a consultant to do that work. But nothing can happen if the wastewater piece is in a situation that's mutually beneficial. And there's so much work that needs to be done to prepare for that, that we don't have budget, right? It's like, if we wanna do development, the wastewater is critical, and investing in understanding how that's gonna work is a component of the earmark that was in the budget, that we presented.
I don't think there's any disagreement with that statement.
Yeah.
I think what John's articulating, because I was of the same mind as Dan and John, is that there may have been, it seems, a miscommunication on, again, kind of like the sources and timing of funding. Such that because we had this fixed variable of spending 725 this fiscal year, we were putting some of that money, in this case, towards wastewater treatment planning and analysis that would have been otherwise funded by other mechanisms.
I would say I didn't see it that way. I like the wastewater treatment plant we didn't have it before this project came along, so it wouldn't have been previously budgeted for. And I guess I would think about the 725 is gone, like, that will be spent, we'll get the work we get out of it, but I don't think we think about it as, I don't know that thinking about it as reimbursement in any way helps the.
Well, can, Mark, you have your hand up, maybe you can answer your priority.
Yeah, so I think that around the wastewater treatment, what we need to realize is that there's a limited amount of capital planning funds that are available from the water sewer division. And if we look ahead, the key element to planning around wastewater is that eventually there needs to be an interconnect planned between the MCI system and the town system. And that is a big project, and it's kind of nowhere on the horizon now. And so the opportunity to use the earmarked money that we didn't know exactly how to spend in the time frame on wastewater is really about, in my mind, saving future wastewater planning dollars for additional wastewater treatment, wastewater system planning, which is foreseeable as this property gets developed. I'd like to actually go back to John's list because I thought it was a good one. One of the ways that I kind of got to the number that I was thinking was assuming that there was a possibility, obviously, that we do have the zoning that was mentioned, but there's also the possibility that we get to June, we've worked hard with agency, we've done some community visioning, but we're not quite ready to launch into zoning. And so there's additional what I would call planning work, and that might be very specific to what's the ask or what's the apportionment of this property that makes sense for municipal use, for example, that we would want to be able to fund within the purview of what we're doing here as the advisory board. And so, you know, I kind of looked at the agency contract and said, well, if it takes us, 4 months to spend $400,000, then we could get it about, 40 to 50% more planning effort for probably similar dollars. So that's kind of how, what I was thinking is a placeholder for planning that might be a contingency. I think it's also worthwhile when we are talking about what the sort of ask for town meeting is, as well as the ask for future funds. If that 275 for some reason doesn't get unlocked by the PAC process or something else, then yes, we could just revert it back to spending in the out of the wastewater capital improvement funds, which means we should go ahead and sign the contracts, which I think we already have. However, we're going to have a planning process beyond that anyway.
Did you hear John's question?
Which you said we should go ahead and sign the contract. Which contracts are you referring to?
I'm talking about the Weston and Sampson contracts that Alan has in place already. He's got 2 ways to pay for those right now. He's got the earmark, and he's got the capital improvement funds for the water sewer system.
For the sewer improvement fund.
Sewer improvement fund. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
So that's why it's.
The contract has not been signed yet, so they haven't commenced work on that.
Oh, no, they are doing work, for us.
But you're saying we could fund it either from the earmark
Yes.
or from the sewer improvements.
So let me explain some of the confusion and why. Water sewer had already retained the services of Weston and Sampson to do wastewater capacity work. Basically, I'm just gonna tell everybody, it was gonna be a very visible and transparent expression of, we have no capacity. And it was gonna take a lot of effort to get a lot of people to understand that. And it was to update the comprehensive wastewater master plan that's now over 20 years old. So it was kind of a rude awakening for everybody to understand we're kind of limited. They were already on board to help us with that. Part of their work is also to explore any capacity opportunities. And so this then came along to, wait, we now have a legitimate, we've been looking for alternatives, groundwater recharge in certain areas and that sort of thing, that we're not high probability, but we didn't have an option. This has now been the focus of, no, this is a capacity opportunity. So we sort of dovetailed in. We talked about the fact that with the earmark or not, we have funds in our reserve that we can spend. And some of it is, and this is where the backfill is interesting, we could do it ahead of when the earmark money is available. But it would be then backfilled with that 280. So that was where my understanding is, we front load because we have the funds, and we knew there was a cap, because I think the original concept was, that's a lot of money, 700 and whatever, before June. I kind of anticipated this was gonna happen anyway, because it's interesting to see that the schedules and reality is, know, such that the legislature doesn't quite appreciate what it takes to just enter into contracts, all this. So now, we're committed to spend the 230,000, whatever it was, I'm sorry, the numbers for wastewater by June 30th. But also know that we have additional funds beyond that, because there's gonna be a lot of work on what it takes to transfer the permit, what we have to do for expanding of capacity, what we may need to do for outreach to the community that can, you know, relate to this project. So we're kind of working side by side. We also gotta be careful that we're not gonna be spending wastewater money backfilling for planning for the zoning and all that. That was never the intent. So that's my synopsis, and I can see the confusion, because it's, you know,
So in that planning,
yeah.
did you have anything that you assumed a developer would be responsible for, or all of the planning and execution for everything in the wastewater area is town driven? I
At
just.
this point, it's town driven. But just to be clear, the whole sewer improvement fund is based on developers or expansion to contribute to a fund so we can tap into it for this very work. So in the future, when we realize what the real cost of absorbing this facility might be, we then have to reevaluate what is the sewer improvement fee. So it's commensurate with the needs. And until we really know what the needs are, it's just an available fund to help us figure that out.
How much money's in a sewer improvement fee?
I'm gonna tell you, it's millions, but I don't wanna tell you how many, whether it's 3 or 4. It's,
I contribute a lot to that from the Bradford Mill project.
I do my share.
and you can act, and that was the beauty.
Alright, so what I'm hearing is, we need somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 as an ask for next year. And that would be the zoning, communications, and additional site planning.
And I like, I don't know who's, I'm sorry, I don't know who said it, but this idea of this planning to support community outreach, you know, that clarity, whatever the code we're talking about, sorry.
Yeah, that would be my additional site planning and communications rolled into one. So between 150 and 250.
And this is small dollars, but when we talk about the entirety of the earmark being expended, we did budget for 440 for kind of planning and consulting work around planning, and our contract is for 400. That was intentional, but wouldn't that be great if we could use that 40, you know, next year for similar work? So that's, you know, it doesn't make a huge dent in it, but it's.
Wasn't the 40 for the historic assessment?
It was a contingency. We don't even have it spent for anything yet. We wanted to have that available. I just want to come back just to say one final comment about this issue of wastewater treatment versus kind of the scope of this committee's work. I guess my feeling is we have a certain charge. And absolutely wastewater treatment is bound up in the success of this project overall, right? If we can't increase capacity, we can't do anything in the site, we know that, right? So it's making sure that the town gets control of that wastewater treatment facility, upgrades, it does whatever it has to do, so that it's useful to us is critical. But I think the reason I had the misunderstanding is partially because the scope of this advisory board's work is to do certain things. It's not about the wastewater treatment diligence or all that work. That's a separate thing. And I guess my feeling is if we are not super confident that we're gonna be able to get an additional earmark for next year, but we do think that we could get a portion of this year's earmark pushed into next year. And if we think that portion is sufficient to cover the 150 to 250, for example, that Peter just estimated, which seems reasonable to me. And if the sewer improvement fee fund has millions of dollars available for this purpose, then I think we should, I don't want to say claw back, but I think we should reallocate that 275 or whatever the number was we said to wastewater treatment. You guys can spend that this year because we need it. We're gonna need it next year to finish our job. And at the end of the day, DCAM is counting on us to deliver on our scope of work. And I think that, you know, just thinking very kind of 40,000 foot level, we don't want to be one of those prison decommissioning projects that fails to actually launch into its next life, right? And so I don't want to find ourselves next year unable to complete the work we started. And again, there's a big pool of money sitting for the purpose of wastewater treatment development. So if that is in fact the case, then I think we should preserve the monies for the use of this commission, of this board's charter.
So does that require a vote or?
I need to offer, you know, in the spirit of, I gotta represent the fund and I appreciate the concept, but it is sort of changing some of the work that we're gonna be doing. For instance, we wouldn't have done more invasive groundwater, the assessment of the abandoned sandbeds. There was a smaller dollar tabletop evaluation, which we're still pending the results of those to find out, do we spend the bigger money to do the more invasive work? But all this is just to, you know, accelerate it to try and marry with this plan. But it's a little bit of a swap in expectation or understanding. And in fact, if you recall, we even had more funds to be identified, inclusive of, I want to be very, you know, again, I'm representing the public works entity, of evaluating very upfront potential siting of a public works facility over there. If you remember, there was some juggling as far as, that's not wastewater, that's the town's, you know, sort of general fund, to evaluate and explore a wastewater treatment plant and a neighbor being the public works facility, and that's on, I think it's on track. We're gonna sit down with the agency tomorrow to, you know, for the first time, to really have them understand what are we talking about when it comes to the public works and wastewater. And I think there's probably some conversation a little bit on the Route 2 rotary as well. You know, they're trying to get that information.
Is that the first meeting of the land use, I forget the name of the land use committee or?
Well, whoever agency is, we haven't had a one-on-one.
No, I know you have, but I mean, from the town side.
No, this isn't the land use, municipal land use task force, through the select board, that's different.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so we need to touch base on that too. Mark?
So there's two schedules for asks and there's a third ask. I think we're all agreed that the ask to extend the use of the 275 is you know, a no-brainer, so we need to do that. But then with respect to additional funding, really there's the sort of more immediate, what number to put in to say, if you can get an earmark for us next year, please do, and make it in this sort of amount for X things. And then there's the one that comes up around the town meeting article where we have more time because basically we don't have to perfect that until a little bit later in the process, although being able to write something in the town meeting budget book, what are we calling it this year? The bulletin?
Briefing book.
Briefing book, right. And the deadline for that, Shannon, is?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know that.
Yeah.
It's in May.
It's in early May, right. So that's the time when we need to be able to explain to the community what we're asking for as an allocation from free cash. And yeah, I know it's also a little bit inside baseball, but if we can put any town staff time reimbursements into the contracts as we have them now, either under the original 400 or the 275, that means that those departments will be a little bit under budget. And what do they do with their underruns? They go to free cash. And what does that have? What does that do? That becomes a funding mechanism for next year. So being able to allocate as many FY25 costs as possible to the earmarks as we know them, both supports our case that we need those earmarks, we were gonna spend them, and it took too long to get them lined up, so please let us continue to spend against them. And that also supports the town's balance of free cash from which we would be planning to withdraw in a town meeting article. And we have a little bit of time to figure out exactly what we want to say about what activities are going to be supported on that. So I just wanted to make those points. So I think the decisions that we need to make are, what are we trying to ask the state for now? And then what are we going to ask the town for later?
So the zoning, we think is 100. Okay, based on
Yeah,
the
based on.
the RFP we got. I think there's no reason not to ask the state. I think we probably won't get it based on everything we all know that's happening, so. What we might as well ask, at least for what we know. I think there was some money we didn't allocate for in the budget you had laid out, Alan, so I don't remember, it was like $80,000 or something like that, but. We might as well tack that on to what we're gonna ask the state for. Certainly try to extend the money we have, but it sounds like it's only a small amount that we'd be able to extend into 26. Based on the original allocation. And then we go through all buckets, like we do a town meeting article too, and. Best case, we have a bunch of money we can give back to the town, but.
Can I just have one more additional, because I gotta run, but, and it's important for DCAM to understand, we have made a commitment that funds will be invested towards the wastewater to continue the negotiations. That commitment is through the sewer improvement fund. We have it available. So we go to town meeting, we just authorize the expenditures of those funds, but I believe it's not a separate article, it's calling out for additional funds. So, we want to stay true to the commitment we've made to DCAM that we'll be spending money.
Yeah, but Alan, if you know what that number is, we could put it into our request for funding from the state for next year, and then that would save money in the sewer improvement fund that could be applied later.
I like the way you're thinking, Mark. Yes, so I hear the ask, and I gotta see if I can work with our consultant to come up with what that might be. Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thanks everybody. Someone watch this guy as I leave, okay?
Let's see, so
So is there a recommendation for a number that we should, from this group, based on what?
I don't know the exact number, but I think it should be the remaining zoning work and the work that Alan has.
I'm still hearing somewhere between 150 and 200.
Well, Erin just articulated 100 for zoning, 80 for wastewater, so we're already at 180.
I made up that number.
That doesn't have anything for communications or community engagement, nor Dan's sustain, like presumably there will be some sort of planning and vision that needs to happen in the next the next fiscal year.
I think the more we can articulate exactly what we're asking for, will probably help our cause.
Yeah, I agree.
Rather than just sort of.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. So if we have work that we know is gonna cost a certain amount and we have proof of that, then we might as well ask for
So
that.
we should ask the agency for what is the next phase or two.
Yeah, I mean, they've given us the next phase already, that was on the RFP,
Yeah.
and then if there's other costs they can foresee in the next 2 quarters that we can commercially.
have they identified gaps in information? I mean,
And again, would they be the conduit through which these funds would flow to their subcontractors? For example, zoning would be handled by Landwise or whoever, because
There's
so as Patrick said, we can ask them to give us a number, right?
Yeah.
That should be.
Like sounds like it's around
More
250.
informed.
Yeah,
Right.
So Megan, will you ask that of them, or is that, we probably don't want to wait until the meeting next week?
Yeah, so I'm hearing from the advisory board that you would like to make a recommendation to Representative Gentile for for FY 26. And at a minimum, it would be 100,000, which is.
no, I would say for 250K.
Okay,
So
so,
there's no minimum max, I'm saying, we believe we're gonna need 250K, and they'll have backup from agency. to support that.
okay. So this advisory board is recommending a $250,000 earmark request. Do you wanna?
And then what about the 10?
I think we wanna request the
And you wanna
factor.
request that?
Yeah.
Do you wanna take some votes on that?
Sure, I would love to do that. So was there, we now don't need a motion, do we, to just vote, go straight to the?
You can make a
All
motion,
right.
make the
Does anyone
motion
want to make a motion?
to recommend.
To recommend?
Okay, so I move that we, request of the town $250,000 in funding to cover this committee's work in fiscal 26. And that we request the PAC, or the right term is, which would enable us to push forward unspent funds from fiscal 25 into fiscal 26.
Second, anyone second that?
And do we need an amount for that?
We don't,
That's
we
just
know
whatever's remaining.
it's whatever.
It's whatever.
we brought here.
John,
I
your
probably have-
second half of the proposal was a little hard to hear. Can you just repeat it?
The second half was to request that unspent funds from the FY 25 earmark be allowed to be pushed forward into FY 26.
Okay.
Via the PAC, or
PAC
I don't know
mechanism.
what it means, but
Right.
yeah,
Okay,
whatever legislative mechanism can support such an outcome.
Can we amend the motion to say that we're requesting state earmarks for these, not just from the town?
yes, yeah, just did, thank you. Is that a second to it?
Second,
She's clarifying.
Yes, sorry.
No, thank you, that was very, very efficient. All right, vote, starting with Aaron.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Peter. Linda.
Yes,
Dan, yes. Aaron, I'm sorry, Emily,
Yes.
thank you. Lee
Yes.
and Elizabeth,
Yes.
thank you all.
And I'm a yes too.
Oh, sorry, Mark. How could I forget you? Sorry.
Apparently you can.
Because you're not in my sight. No, you are, but I'm looking at the right spot. Okay, great. Thank you all. That was good. And do you have scheduling?
I do, yeah, thank you. So. Shannon, maybe you could-
Sorry, I didn't mean to take us back, but I don't know that we resolved the discussion that John and Alan were having as well. I know where the conversation landed, but I don't know that we came to a decision as to whether or not that, I'll call it a clawback, can happen or not. And I feel like we have a bit of an incomplete fact base, because like, I'm hearing that there's millions of dollars in the sewer fund.
But I guess what I'm hearing is the millions of dollars are needed to actually do a construction project to make the future wastewater treatment plant work. Like, there's probably a major town utility project that has to connect all the way across town.
Well, that's gonna be a $25 million project.
Right.
When it comes to it, and so I guess, in this case, our paltry hundreds of thousands of dollars are not that important in the scheme of their ultimate spending. And if this earmark was not granted to this advisory board for our scope of work.
Well, I think that's one piece that if I had a whiteboard in here, oh, do you mind? If I had a whiteboard, I'd probably mark it out, and that's how I think, but. One piece of this is, and the policy is all for you, right, but for the flow of the funds. The funds came to the town for this project. This group is an advisory board appointed by the select board for the charge. So I think that the recommendation for the funding, and the budget that was presented and approved and discussed in December and submitted to the state was for these two elements. And so I think there is kind of like an overlap of like, yes, your charge is for this one piece, but you advised on how the town should spend the earmark, which is going to the whole project, might be part of the rub, if that makes sense. How you're recommending to proceed, is up to all of you, but the money didn't just come to this advisory board, as I understand it. It came to the town, and this is the advisory board advising on how to spend it. Is that?
I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Yes, and I think, I don't want to put words in John's mouth, he doesn't mean to do that. But I think it's a little bit about, for me, expectations, and I suspect, shouldn't do this to him either, But I suspect if Scott were here, I think he'd be raising the concerns that, you know, these guys are raising as well. And so, I think you made a really good point. I think it is, there was like a blurring of it in order to solve a problem. And so, I think Patrick and John are right to bring it back up, and I don't know how to solve it right now, unfortunately, but.
Maybe it would be helpful in our, I don't know when our next meeting is, so it might have to be an interim meeting with one of the subcommittees. If it is indeed like a month from now that we're all getting back
We're
together.
getting together next week for an update from agency, but I'm not.
So maybe, well, whatever the right timing is, and a month is too long. I think maybe bringing back that schedule that we originally hashed out, I'll call it, between the wastewater plan and visioning and master planning. And the information that we used when we did that has now changed. Right, and I think what we're discussing now is if we were to relook at that schedule with the information that we have today, would we make a different decision? And then we can decide, like, if we have the ability to make a different recommendation or not.
I wonder if we might delegate this, Elizabeth, you're still here, Peter, to the Legal and Government Affairs Committee, potentially.
Yeah.
And maybe we should reserve like 15 minutes at the beginning or the end of our meeting next Thursday to try to come to closure on this.
I think that's a great idea for Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you receptive to that?
I am, yes.
Okay, I think that's
It's great.
great on, okay. Yeah, and I do have, to your point, Patrick, I did, if anybody needs it, I did find that schedule.
I'm a little confused. But where we are, because we're talking about a wastewater treatment plant. And then we're also talking about a public works department. And we don't have any oversight over what's going on with public works and what they're doing with Weston and Sampson. Yet the funds that we're responsible for and the project that we're responsible for is being included in that. And it seems to me, when Alan says that they're planning for the possibility of relocating public works to the MCI site.
That hasn't been decided.
Well, it hasn't
Yeah.
been decided or discussed, and we really haven't included that in any of the visioning scenarios, and so yet he's going to sign a contract with Weston and Sampson to explore that, so I'm just really confused as to this whole discussion. And I'm finding that that we should be working together on this process, but I'm finding that there's independent actions that are making assumptions that aren't all the same, and I don't know how we should be addressing that. And it does tie into the scheduling and where the money's going to. So,
Yeah, before you respond, that's 2 minutes on
yeah,
that.
Karen, yeah.
I was gonna say the same thing, like this meeting, so agency is just the consultant for the MCI property, they're not a town-wide land use consultant. So I'm a little concerned that there's already a discussion about, with agency and the town staff about a municipal, non-wastewater project on the MCI site without having evaluated all the other sites.
That's why I was asking that question.
Right, and we're sort of leaving out our commitment to talk to the public and to get the public's input onto what they want onto the site. And it'll be up to the Public Works Department to make their case to the public. And then that result of that will inform us. We can't, present people with a fait accompli when we have a commitment to public engagement.
John,
I think, your word about alignment is the right word. Probably all of us are aware that lurking in the background somewhere is a huge vision to move a whole bunch of municipal services onto the MCI property. It would take something like 30 or 40% of the available land area. I've never seen the plan, I've only heard rumors of this, but I think that we don't know anything about it. And we kind of talked about this a few months ago as whether that cart was getting ahead of the horse, if you will. When I think we want to go through an open public visioning process without anything predetermined or no fait accomplis kind of in the mix.
So,
If you don't mind me to respond to a couple of
Sure.
things, I think, one thing I'd like to mention is the work that's being done by Weston and Sampson, for the wastewater analysis is what is outlined in the budget that you just had up in your binder. There's no, that the work from that earmark has been discussed and approved by this group and the select board in December. So I don't want anyone to think that those earmark funds are being used for other elements. That's not my understanding.
I think there may have been some confusion. Alan's an agency. Weston Sampson, as far as I know, hasn't done any work with the municipal public works project. They're focused on wastewater. Is my understanding.
I suspect he's briefing agency on some of the ideas about putting a whole bunch of municipal services.
I think agencies doing their fact finding for their discovery next week, right?
Right.
And so they did a huge data collection effort. They've had conversations with various departments. Their subs are working with, what the light plant folks, and some things you can just drop in the folder and some require a conversation. And so, my understanding is this is a follow-up conversation as part of the discovery phase. And I think for the municipal piece, I think, I don't exactly know what the topic is, and I think I have it in here of what they're meeting, but I thought it was just kind of collecting information. And, as regarding, municipal interest at the site, I think there has been some discussion here. There was a white paper that I presented, a few months ago, and that we, as a community, is seeking to solve some municipal challenges. This is one of the properties that may come online. I don't think it's gone much further than thinking about that.
so I'm gonna take a pass at this. I think, and Peter probably can make this point even better, but, the planning process, especially in this moment of discovery, is kind of messy. Because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's gotta get drawn into it, and Alan, I love him dearly, he's a smart guy, and he's also a very big picture person, so. I think part of what we might be running into is a little bit of language and how we talk about these things, and when you talk about them, we've got, agencies made the point, it's a sprint. And so there's a lot of stuff happening very quickly, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be raising these questions. I think they're absolutely appropriate, and I think it's important to communicate to them but even in the course of just being able to have this conversation, I need to raise my hand and talk about this other effort related to the land use piece, which is they're forming a committee, and they've asked the MCIAB to designate a representative to attend that. And so I think that's a fabulous idea. Peter and I talked about it a little bit. Erin and I talked about Scott, and I think probably it would be Scott because of his experience and background and because of availability. I would like it to be Erin, but Erin's on about 14 committees right now, so trying not to add 15. So I'm not. On one hand, I'm trying to say, don't worry, and on the other hand, I'm acknowledging that we should be worried and we should be vigilant, and for all the reasons that people have shared around the table. And I don't think I just think it's a moment in it, and I'm confident based on conversations I've had with the agency that they understand. I think the point that Megan made, that it is something. It's out there as a thought, as another need. It kind of falls into all of those categories of stuff that we're trying to grapple with, like the wastewater treatment. And so I don't know. I don't have a complete thought with that, but I just wanted to share that.
I just want to get
Mark has his hand.
Mark,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, so I feel like I need to sort these three things out. So the land use task force that the select board has started is going to be looking at all of the available properties, 2229 Main Street, Peabody School, MCI, and what might happen if some of those properties become available, and try to sort out the best use of those properties all taken together. And they're on a 1-year schedule that the select board is setting up. So we've asked this board and 8 others to provide representatives to represent those interests. And one of the interests that we expect to come before that board is the town manager saying, if I could have this sort of, some version of a reconfigured municipal environment, and she's made her, the priorities are pretty clear: the public safety building and the public works facility need to be somehow redone. This is what it would, the town manager should be saying, this is what it would look like, and can any of these pieces of property, MCI, 2229, Peabody School, maybe some others that become available if something moves, which ones of those properties can solve that problem in best? And so we've been, as a select board, leaning on the town manager and to be ready to answer that sort of question: what will best fit municipal needs going forward, in the context of some of the other needs that are also going to be looked at, like economic development and housing and recreation and open space and all of those others. So that's what that group is there to do. We, on the other hand, as the MCI Advisory Board, are there to try and understand this particular site and think about what's the best allocation among all of those different needs of this particular piece of property. So hopefully that description, we're focused on a particular piece of property, and we're going to get an ask from a lot of groups about this property, that the land use matrix group is trying to figure out across all the properties what's the best allocation. And town staff is working on what do they really need at this point, what can they bring forward to articulate as a consistent plan for how town facilities should evolve next. So those three things are going on at the same time. And sometimes when somebody says something about one, it can be sort of conflated to be part of another one, but hopefully that's a helpful distinction.
Karen?
I was just gonna jump, given the time, I'm gonna jump to outcomes. We asked agency for 3 scenarios, like 3 scenarios. I think one could involve a municipal use, but I don't think all 3 should. I think is what we'd like to see.
Could we touch on schedule at least? Because I know I'm gonna get asked about that tonight.
We have, received, we could pass this on to an updated schedule from agency just this morning. I'm gonna pass this around too. This is an email that they sent me. If you don't mind sharing that. So you have it as you're heading out to describe it in a little bit more detail, the expectations around these meetings. We have next week's scheduled, right? Everyone has April 3rd on your calendar. I think the one piece, and I don't know, Shannon, if we've gotten a reply from that email this morning, that I wanted to talk with you all about is it sounded like this group wanted to keep things to Mondays if possible. This schedule in front of you does include some non-Mondays. So I did ask them this morning, could we shift a couple of these back to the Mondays? For example, they have May 7th as a workshop. Could that be switched to May 5th? But I wanted to ask you, is that your preference, or what are you thinking about those types of meetings? They did say our typical meetings here are 90 minutes. They would need longer for these workshops. So I think you could do it either way. You could have it in the place of, or you could have it as a standalone as it isn't going to be talking about committee business like has been discussed today, you know, it's a different flavor, so.
Which ones are you talking about in this?
And this one, I'm talking about the,
Yes, row one. May seventh.
May 7th,
June fourth, yeah.
June 4th, and
This one.
then the 26th is the presentation.
Yeah,
If nothing else, I think our AD meetings should be. We're gonna do them back to back, like this should be immediately after, I sort of think. To kind of debrief,
I think they were trying to do them together.
yeah,
oh, that's,
Which is why Megan was saying, hopefully we can move these back to Mondays and they can
Yeah.
be done together, but I think. You could have them on the Mondays, but it's not gonna be, the 2 hours is not including time for exactly, is what I'm saying, it's a
Yeah.
2-hour
It's
workshop.
agencies work, it's agencies 2 hours, if
Yes.
you wanna do something else.
we need
Yeah.
to either have a 3 hour meeting
well, I think we,
or have
Sprints.
different meetings.
Or a 2 hour one day and 1 hour the next day.
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. What time is the meeting on the April 3rd?
I'm with you, or even because if we don't need the time.
We
Then,
can always work our own meetings around.
Yeah. yes,
So basically, we go with the Monday meetings we have scheduled already, just pick 1 hour.
The answer is noon.
what did you say, Mark?
Emily wanted to know the time of the April 3rd meeting, and I said it's noon. 2,
When, sorry?
noon to 2.
Noon to 2, okay. And then, just on scheduling, tomorrow night is the presentation to the school committee. I think. Mark, you're coming. Is anyone else able to attend?
Do you want me to come, Emily?
Only if you want to, and I don't mean that to be facetious, like. if it
Right,
works,
it's fine.
Emily, if I come
you-
to it, I'd have to miss the Anderson Hospital annual meeting, which I wouldn't be that upset about. So,
I had
if you
it,
need me, I'll come.
I also had it on my calendar, I can be flexible.
Yeah, and I had it on my calendar, but I'm happy to either way. If you need another person there, just let me know. I will not plan on unless I hear from you.
Yeah, I think we're fine. I think, Mark, you're coming, right?
Mark's out of commission, you know.
Yes, I think I'll make it.
Okay,
Got it. Yeah, so I think if Mark and I are there, we're good. Thank you.
okay,
So there were, 2 meetings on April 3rd. One was the Jerome Pond meeting, but I also heard that the West Concord Advisory Board was updating its master plan that same evening to take into account, the MCI development. So, we probably need to make sure we've got someone from our committees attending both of those
So I've got in my calendar, April 2nd,
for
for updating the West Concord Advisory
Okay, good.
Committee on this project.
okay, good.
So we're on their agenda for April 2nd, 7:30.
Peter's right, though. The Warner's Pond Task Force is presenting the options for Warner's Pond in the evening of April 3rd. I believe it's 5 o'clock, and it's at the hearing room.
So this group's preference is to shift the 3 meetings to the Mondays.
yes.
That's okay. I will. And make them longer. And make them, well, as long as they need, and then.
As long as they
Yeah,
need.
if you wanna add on to it, correct. So can you just follow up with the agency on that? Okay.
Thank you.
So this is gonna be revised, you know, and I'll send this out to those online too, but it's gonna be, maybe once we get the updated one, just so there's no confusion.
This is great and it's really helpful. Sorry. Keith,
I just want to,
Oh, wait a minute.
one other important date for the schedule, which is the weeks of 4/28 and 5/26. That's when we're planning the big community visioning exercises. We don't know exactly what those are gonna be quite yet, but those are there'll be sometime during those.
Well, the 30th, I think, and on this email here, got plugged in,
Yeah, I think on both weeks you're targeting Wednesdays.
Okay,
as an evening, April 30th. We met with them preliminarily, and looked at the town calendar. There's not a select board meeting that day. I mean, I think it's hard these times, but I mean, if anyone sees any conflicts with that one.
so row 7 speaks to John's.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
whatever the seven is.
So that's
So
4:30, 5:26.
And the two time options will be like an afternoon and evening. Yes,
Is 5/26 Memorial?
5/26 is Memorial Day, yeah, so I think
Yeah,
5/28
so
was the
the week
date.
of.
the
Oh, okay.
targeted, yeah.
so the what,
Yeah, that's been updated on this.
Could be 5/28 and 8/30.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Shannon, it's a bit hard for me to hear the dates going around. If you could just put those in an email to confirm. I have the right.
Is this sheet that we can get to you to
Okay, thank you.
helpful? All right, we're late, but, Keith, there's something quick?
Yeah, first, it's great to see an engagement strategy. I'm Keith Bergman, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. At the Select Board's meeting on March 3rd, it was said that there'd be outreach to the housing groups as a group, and we reached back to try to see when we could all get together. So I'm just wondering, in the framework of that schedule, when the group, when the housing groups would get to engage with your team. Thanks.
Because I think the initial thought was, and Emily and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, that because there are a lot of people involved in those groups, that it might be better to have that meeting after one of our public visioning sessions. Assuming that a lot of those folks would go to the public visioning, because I'm afraid we won't have really any sense of public things before the first one of those. So I would suggest, again, others pipe in, that we wait until after the first visioning session in April, so maybe we try to do that sometime in early May. Would that work?
We will make it work.
Thanks.
Okay.
I would accept, well, is there any other public comment? I'm seeing any. I would accept a motion to wrap up. Better word, adjourn, thank you.
Second.